So from product pitch to business value, driving lasting seller transformation. So customers don't want product pitches or explainers. They get that information themselves anyway. They want sellers who can confidently connect solutions to business outcomes. This session shows revenue leaders why sellers default to features under pressure and how to change that for good. So it's a behavior problem, not a knowledge problem. Sellers already know they should sell value. The job is helping them to show up differently in the room, building a program that makes it stick. We end the session with some anecdotes and proof points of some of the programs we've been involved with, including a growth story from $15 million to $3.8 billion of assets under contract. So welcome everybody to this particularly hot day in London. It's about 35, and if I keel over and faint, it's down to the weather rather than anything that Matt's saying. Hi, I'm Chris, co-founder of Sales Growth Team. I like alpine sports. I like watching the World Cup when it's not too hot. And I really am passionate about helping to change seller behaviors where the tanker is moving one way and it's time to move it to another. So plenty of experience. I think there's about 17,000 people that we've spoken to, moving them through some of the programs in organizations that we have worked with around the globe. And I really enjoy helping our customers with their exam questions and putting our experience and IP and technology towards helping them gain more traction within the market. So Matt, if you could introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Matt Naunton. I'm a seller at heart. Spent all of my career in sales, and normally one of the common traits I've faced into is I've been one of the first salespeople that have been asked to sell a new as a service model. So I've had a lot of background in that space. My passions are obviously I enjoy football, and I enjoy playing golf as well. So my mission this year is just to break the 10 handicap. So hopefully that's on track at the moment.
Very good, very good. So, Matt, price is what you pay, value is what you get. Who said that?
The most famous investor in the world, probably Warren Buffett. But literally any salesperson should be saying exactly the same thing as himself.
But they don't necessarily, do they? So let's just focus on that for a little bit. And often with operator with credibility, when you're thinking about that value-based conversation, price and value. So whichever way you look at that, you cannot help but fail to realize, I guess that's why everybody's on this call, that you need to be in that position where the customer sees big value that's specific to them with your solution. So this is fairly obvious, but it never ceases to amaze me. When I look at this scale, a lot of sellers that we work with in the sales teams, they kind of get towards a certain level on that scale, but not right towards the end. And if you think about the benefits to the customer of being bottom left, it's kind of, you're talking about features, you're talking about the product, you're talking egocentrically about what you're bringing to the market. And it's not particularly offering a lot of shareholder value. It's not necessarily sticky in the sales process. It's easy to get knocked off. You can get derailed by the competition's price, etc. So it's not really gripping and of huge interest to the customer. Whereas right the other way, you've got that agreed position where the customer understands all the value, they understand why, the differentiators, and they understand what it means to them. They are ready to take that value to the board to get it signed off. So that's really where we want to be. And customers want sellers who connect the solutions to the outcome. Yet most sellers default to features and functionality. Matt, we saw a Harvard Business Review the other day that said 70% of 1,200 buyers stated that they're too product and internally focused. Do you agree with that? Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, 100%. I think in our own research we've worked with, as we said earlier, 17,500 sellers, leaders, and SLT in the last few years. And I think generally, as a common rule of thumb, in the process we take people through, salespeople, if you ask them the first time you ask them, will tell you they're value selling, and they're probably talking about a few case studies into that value conversation. But the reality is, when you start to unpack it, when you start to get deeper into the conversation, when you start to look at the proposals they're sending out, it's really quick to recognize that actually they're not talking about the customer, they're not customer centric, they're not talking about value. So I wholeheartedly agree with that assessment from Harvard Business Review. And I think it's probably one of the reasons why we're here, and one of the things we exist for is to help try and change that perspective.
Yeah, and I think even more of the context today, even if you think back maybe 12 months ago, it's, in the age of the types of information that you can pull off from Claude or GPT or whatever. So it's more relevant than it's ever been. The differential between that value piece and great salespeople and everyday run-of-the-mill transactions. So, we want everybody to be to the right of that graph that we just have seen there. So on this webinar, we know that we want people to come away with an understanding of why people revert to type, why it's challenging, but obviously more importantly, what you can do about it to make those behavioral changes stick and really be sustainable over time. So we want our viewers on the webinar to come away with some proven frameworks that are at the core of a multi-billion-dollar successful sales transformations and evolutions, call them what you will, where those individuals have led then with value and had that value-based, outcome-based conversation. So we'd love you to ask us some questions as we go. We have about 40 minutes, and then we have 20 minutes for questions. We'll try and get you ahead of that time if we can. And I just wanted to check the chat. So if somebody could put a Y for yes in the chat to check it's all working, that would be fantastic. And we'd love to ask you to ask questions within the chat as we move along. That would be really good. So interactivity is really superb. So we have had some great questions coming in. We had a really good one from David earlier. So we've got some good questions that we're already primed for in the webinar. So Matt, so why does this challenge exist? What have you got to change? Where are the risks? And why is it hard to really read your team?
I mean, the obvious answer in the team, I think, is that most salespeople will think they're selling value, and they think they're delivering more value to their customer than they actually really are. But I think the reasons why. So if I go back to when we first met at Hewlett Packard Enterprise, we were facing into a very product-centric organization that for a number of years had been selling product tin to customers repeatedly. And it was like they'd made a pedigree. No one was going to get fired for buying HPE kit, and they were very safe. Those sales guys were under huge pressure each quarter to deliver a number, and they were being inspected and on their forecast on a regular basis. So all of their engagements with the managers were predominantly around the forecast call. When I joined that company, I don't think it took me a couple of years to have any really decent coaching around any of the new services we're bringing out. So there was a real laggard in the sales leadership there as well as the sellers. And if we looked at the organization at the time, every time we went to a training course, it was all around value selling and getting deeper into services. Yeah, all of our assets, our contents, our proposals were all geared around product and marketing features. The two stories took a long time to connect and join up. And it became to a point where the bulk of the sales teams were really comfortable doing what they were doing. They were going to see a customer, they were talking and projecting at a customer. Very few were really skilled at hunting for value. Very few of them were actually able to bring stories to life. Yes, they could tell a story, but it wasn't necessarily connected to trying to find a reason why. So in your graph, in the example we showed earlier, we were big advocates of using the power of customer stories to bring the customer to life, draw out of the customer why they were seeing a problem or a challenge or a pain, and then be able to monetize that with a dollar value. A lot of people will turn up and throw up a story, but without really any real context. And that was one of the problems we faced into.
I remember sort of, one of the salespeople, pretty successful, worked for me and was going in to see a bank in Canary Wharf. And that individual, I just happened to sort of stumble across, what will you talk about to make the story come alive? What research, what proof points? How will you get into the conversation around value? And the individual spoke to me about a university in Queensland. Now, we did have some good assets and data points, etc., proof points that he could have opened up the conversation with. But this is just an example of people, love what they know what they love, kind of thing. So, it never ceases to amaze me that people have a comfort zone. So, everybody on the call, this would probably resonate in that if you were a greenfield company, you were starting from scratch, it would be easier to start at the point of the value conversation and to start there. But historically, we know companies have been going, they have existing revenue streams, they have the wheels on, that they have to keep moving to get those revenue streams in. And you touched on it earlier, Matt, where you've got this point around the culture, and the culture being, what's the expectation? How are they monitored? How are they measured? What's the accountability and what's that responsibility on those individuals? So they're already going in one direction. So you've got to get them over into another point. So that leads nicely onto this element of the knowing doing gap. What is the knowing doing gap in this example?
Yeah, for me, it's when I first stepped into a leadership role, it was recognizing that salespeople in the organization had all been through the value selling training. They all knew what they're doing. They were all performing in the classroom. But I couldn't understand why, when they're going to see the customer, they weren't able to translate it into real action. So I don't necessarily see knowledge as a blocker. I think people a lot of the time they know what they need to do, but when you look at the things around them, they were really struggling with it. And I think that was one of the hardest things I had to learn, was actually there is a knowing doing gap, and then it's working out, how do you actually change their behavior? How do you get salespeople opening up a different conversation? How do you get them to really sort of broaden their own horizons and challenge customers in a slightly different way?
I mean, certainly all the programs that we've been involved with, a lot of the sellers that we talk to, they know what they should be doing, don't they? If I think back to training as well that I've been involved with, seller, manager, leader, it's logical. They know all about the sales methodologies and things like that. They know what they should be doing, but day to day, they're just not doing it for the reasons that you've just spoken about there, Matt. So what's got to change then? How do you get this change going?
So, I mean, if I go back to almost one of the first times we met and we started working together, one of the first exercises we did was to really go through the salespeople and where they're at. And I think I'll just introduce one of the frameworks that we then took this into. So we sort of built a framework a few years ago around drive, and really the rationale behind this was, when we were looking at the salespeople, we knew there were loads of spiffs in place, and I know you absolutely hate spiffs, but there were spiffs in place. And Chris's perspective on a spiff is that it's just going to tell a salesperson this thing's hard to do. And yes, you can make a lot of money, but you're going to probably give up a lot of your time because it's new, it's raw, and it's a real challenge. But, deep down, we really wanted people who were motivated to invest the time and energy they needed to change. We also needed to make sure that the organization was equipping them with the ability to have these business value conversations. So we recognized at the time, everybody was screaming that we needed a pricing tool. And we were we spent weeks and months fighting that organization to build a business value calculator instead of a pricing tool. Why? Because actually, as we said earlier, if you can get into a business value conversation from the very first meeting with a customer, you are going to improve your chance of winning that customer. You're going to improve your chance of being differentiated, and you're going to have a point of view that is going to help you really cement a better value and a better relationship with a customer. So there are loads of things that we tried to do really early on. And when we first ran sort of the drive process, on the sales teams, we actually only had a handful of people out of a global organization that we felt as if were really in the drive position. The majority of them had pockets of things that they were strong at, but the majority of them were way below scoring 50% on the framework. And pretty much any organization we've been to since, when we run that process, which is getting exactly the similar sort of outcomes, where you will absolutely have a percentage of your organization that will be high flyers in the drive position. They are exhibiting the best practice today, but the majority of the organization, when it comes to value selling, will be a long way from perfect here.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's very easy to say these things and to look at these and say, yes, this is true. You've got to be all of these 5 things to get a cynical seller in the right place to adopt a behavioral change, a changed approach. They, as we said earlier, they will have been burnt in the past. They're naturally skeptical of change, and rightly so, because they're protective of their time. So a couple of points here, Matt, for me that really stand out is that you've got to be all 5 of these. So your organization, the program that you're running, you have to be all of these 5 things. Otherwise, your risk of failure starts to really creep in. And you know what it's like? The worst thing you want is a seller saying, oh, I spent X amount of weeks or months on this. It didn't go anywhere. It didn't work. I don't like it. It was a waste. And they tell all their friends. So that's obviously where we can't be. So another thing to this as well is that you really want to be in a position where you've got objective data. So exactly where you are on the D, the R, the I. So where are you specifically? So yes, we can benchmark against other organizations out there, but more interestingly, as you were alluding to earlier, Matt, is that you've probably got a number of people that are super strong, that could take the training course, that know about it, that practice it, that do it in their day to day. So where is the rest of your team compared to those high flyers? So how have you objectively seen that? And we'll come on to that in a second in terms of that process. But really, the steps that you need to bake customer value into the sales kind of day to day. So where we are right now in the conversation, it's clear that it's not necessarily a knowledge thing in isolation. Sure, there will be some of that, but it's more about the doing of the doing. How are you empowering that? How are you supporting that? How are you getting that seller experience towards the drive position so that you're mitigating those risks of, going to a training, it falling off, it's not supported at manager level, all those types of things. So the steps to bake in customer value into the day-to-day, let's have a look at that, Matt. So the process
just before we jump onto that, Chris, one of the points I'd also make as well is when we first started doing this process, we got to the point where we were sending out a survey to people, and obviously what we were getting back were tons of really positive experiences. So when we started to unpack it, so the thing that we thought was really useful was actually starting to unpack some of those responses. So we then started interviewing people, and one of the things that we would ask is it's a really basic question, like, tell me about your organization, tell me what you do, as if we're at a barbecue and we're having a barbecue and a beer. And the responses you got back, you think, oh God, I'm never ever going to go for a barbecue or a beer with you guys, because you get all of the features of the company they work for. You don't get any of the fun stories. And one of the classics we had was we had one company that was doing some really great stuff with a company that's putting rockets into space, and yet they explained at a really granular level what they were doing. And it's like, you're doing some really cool things as a company, but you don't talk about it. So I think there's a lot of things that I think this by actually speaking to people and then benchmarking it against the proposals they're sending out or the presentations they're sharing to their customers is a really powerful way for you to really quickly get a snapshot of where is your organization at, how close to the drive position are your sellers really, because they'll all tell you their driving value all the way through.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And how you get to that baseline position to understand exactly where you are. I mean, I'm with you on the survey things. You kind of lose interest by question 3, right? And of course, salespeople, somebody said this, I took offense and then agreed with them. Somebody said to me the other day, salespeople, oh, we're not going to interview salespeople because they love to complain. They love to complain, finger pointing and all the rest of it. So I agreed, but then you've got to get past the complaint or the unwarranted praise. You've got to get to the real position and understand the business impact of that. So what are they saying? Is it true? What's the impact, either positive or negative, to get that baseline position? And that, why is that difficult, Matt, for individuals to do that? Why is that hard?
Yeah. Just before you touch on that, because there's a really good question just coming from David actually around.
Okay.
So David said about with Drive, can you benchmark assess Drive internally? Sorry, you can benchmark assess Drive internally. Did you ask customers, do you trust your rep? So we haven't always done that. It's a great thing to do, and some people have actually encouraged us to do that. Not everyone does. The reason why I think that's really important to do is it allows you to, so we always try and tend to speak to customers and understand why they see value in the solutions that the customer brings. But I think there's a massive benefit for us in terms of actually going out and seeing about perception people have of you as an organization. There is something around trust as well. Do they trust the people? And I think I definitely see there's some value in that. And Chris, you've got a really good perspective around why it's important to get the customer's insights as well.
Yeah. So when I first took on the role at HPE, I had this is, back in the day, I had my trusty digital SLR and went around and interviewed customers, not because I didn't trust what sellers were telling me, although some of it was a pinch of salt. I really wanted to understand and hear it straight from the horse's mouth, what they found about it and what their experiences were, good, bad, unexpected, how they could improve it. And so I was getting that external feedback in that way. And what I was surprised about, because at that time we were, globally we're selling this solution and service, and I wanted to really try and understand what the business benefits were and if there were any patterns. And I was expecting to get about 2 or 3 key benefits back. And when I ran that process, we got like over a dozen, maybe 14, 15 key benefits coming back and that allowed us to set the scene, go back to the sellers and sort of say, look, these are the areas of the conversations that you need to have. These are, the areas, the stones that you need to turn over to see if there's value there or not. Because, as sales and revenue leaders, our ultimate goal is to help the sellers get to a point of qualification quickly. It's about return on time investment for a seller, right? So we don't, the worst thing we can do is drag on a sales process and then it goes nowhere. We want them to get to a point of, yes, this is great. I'm passionate about it. I want to double, triple down. I really think this is great. I should take this forward. Or there's no value there. I need to get out quickly and focus on other things. So our job in this whole process is to have a seller come back and say, my experience of this was strong. I was able to qualify out quickly. It wasn't for me, but I can see where the value is and where the conversations are. Or the seller says, yes, it was great. I knew exactly what to talk to get it to grip. So think of it in those terms. And what are we doing as organizations that understand how we need to support that journey for the seller? I could see some typing going on, Matt. Is there any other questions that have come in?
No, it's fine.
Okay. So in terms of time, I'm really passionate about it. I could talk about this for ages, but I'm thinking about keeping us on track. So in terms of steps to bake in when we're trying to make this effective, it's a high stakes environment. We want to keep it on track for our sellers, and we want positive feedback from their experience. So what are the processes that we classically run through and mitigate risk, Matt?
Yeah, so the framework of Share Now is, we call it the GEAR framework. And I think what we've done with GEAR was we recognized that everywhere we were going, we wanted to ground the the organization. So we wanted to go through the drive process to really understand where the teams were and gain that unbiased perspective on their propensity and capability, looking across the assets they have, looking at the way they're building proposals. And then, as Chris was saying, very much what we then do logically as the next step is really equip the teams with the right language that they need to have the right conversations. So making sure they've got the right practices, the playbooks, the tools. So as Chris was alluding to, when we first started GreenLake, we had a couple of IDC, a couple of Forrester research articles that we were using, sort of like the generic benefits that we're expected to get from the service, until we had a real wealth of customer knowledge. And we would then start to equip over the next few years all of those great wins. Every time we want a deal, we'd interview the seller and the customer to really draw out the where does it grip moment. Why did the rubber hit the road? Why did the customer eyes light up? And as Chris was saying, in most cases, we were getting a lot of really good, in the early days, we were getting a lot more value out of the customer conversations and where they saw the value than we were from the sales teams. So it's a really powerful way of building up that knowledge base and then building a really deep community around it, so that each week, each month, we were sharing those stories to overcome the challenges we faced really early on, where we had salespeople talking about the University of Queensland when they're off to see Barclays. So it does help make that difference. And then the third part of the process that we go through, and we learn again really early on, is that people go in training courses and do nothing with it. So we used to almost like mandate, so we used to call it a lighthouse program, but we mandate a lighthouse program where we would actively work with people. So everyone that comes to the sessions would come with a customer in mind, and by the end of the session, they've built a cover plan which is focused on the challenges, the objectives, and the value that their customer is going to be facing into. And over the course of the next 2 weeks, we were actively running a program where we were spoon feeding them with really powerful insights into the accounts they're facing into, giving them a point of view, helping them shape a point of view, and helping them go and have an early conversation with a customer. And more importantly, we were getting them to do that proactively off cycle, which was a massive transformation for these people. But actually, it's the best place to start a value-based conversation is without an RFP in play. So actively building programs where they physically had to go out and talk to customers about a different approach. And it took a while to embed in some organizations. Some have been much quicker than others. But what it also does then, it brings in that apply phase, really brings in the senior leadership team and the sales managers to really start to change their behaviors around how they show up with their account teams, how they show up with their sellers, and the questions that they start to ask. And of course, the end of it's a constant refinement. It's a constant building that community. So every 2 weeks, we would have a community call where salespeople would voluntarily come to it to talk about their practices of selling value. So they were sharing their value-based conversations they were having, where it was gripping, where it wasn't gripping. So it meant that actually we had this continual cycle of new stories being created, because we could continually go and sort of tell stories to customers about what other people were seeing and doing to try and build that greater value-based conversation. Right. And of course, that's how we started the process probably about 6-7 years ago now. And over the last few years, a lot of this now is supported with AI. So obviously, if we look at the equip phase, today, some of our clients, we're spoon feeding them with points of view. If a person goes onto a webinar or if a person runs a podcast, we can, again, if a CEO turns up on it, we can send that information directly to the customer. So we've got some really cool tech that is helping to spoon feed points of view, getting it into the hands of the salesperson proactively to almost force them to use those value-based conversations. And exactly the same with the appliers. We have a series of AI coaching where it's, again, consistently spoon feeding the right conversation, the right case study. It's allowing you, it can proactively listen to the conversation you're having and feed you with dig deeper questions. Again, so it's helping you have those value-based conversations in real time so that you actually are starting to really embed the best practices that you're trying to achieve. And what we've seen in some of the transformations we've run recently, you can really accelerate the transformation you can change the balance from having the majority of your salespeople selling features. You very quickly can get them to a value-based conversation and being the majority of the company very quickly. And we've seen some really good results with this as well.
Yeah, and I think it's probably worth digging into that a little bit more around the spoon feeding bits. So we have phrases that we use that at first sound a little bit derogatory, they sound a little bit patronizing. So we always look for Fisher Price spoon feeding, Lego type moments. And the reason that we're looking for these throughout these programs to get to those value, but it's because they've got the wheels turning on existing revenue streams. So we're asking them to do something different. They're cynical. So part of that psyche, it has to be super easy for them to get on the bus with these processes. And it has to be super easy for them to get value and get to that point of qualification quickly. So whilst they might sound a little bit sort of patronizing, derogatory, they're absolutely needed because everybody reverts to type under pressure and under the normal culture. So it's not just what's in it for me as a seller, it's what's in it for my customers, why we could do. So we have to sell as sales and revenue leaders, we have to sell to sellers. So we had a great question come in earlier on around, new service. We don't have many, if any, customers yet. And, how do we get sellers to pick up on those value-based conversations early on to do different behaviors? And this is a common one. Organization that I used to work for, where we always used to have this big event in Vegas every year. And we used to launch these services that were very early in the sort of embryonic infancy stages of an ideal world. They weren't quite ready, but they were launched because of the pressure of the new event. So we had to quickly get into a situation where there was clarity, honesty, transparency with the sellers to say, this is where we are with this offer. So if you're bringing in a new offer where you haven't got many or any customers, you have to have that point of conviction around it. So why did we develop these new products and offers? What's the thinking around it? Who in the company thinks it's a good idea? Why? What are the data points? Do we have any analysis, any analysts' view on that, etc.? What have we got where we can build and get to a position with sellers to say, hey, transparency and simplicity are what you need here. So you need to have these conversations to qualify in or out quickly, thinking of what the seller needs to get out of it, where they need to get to, and being completely transparent about that, feeding in what you have got, which might be more than you think. We might be able to get a lot of value from the product people, the SLT within the organization, marketing, etc., analysis, whether it's Forrester, Gartner, whoever it's going to be. There will be some elements of helping the seller to say, hey, we think, and the market tells us that these things are important. Is that the same for you? How do you feel about that, Mr. Customer? Getting into that conversation about value quickly. Another point I wanted to raise, Matt, is that I'm a big fan in the value conversation around having a super simple business value calculator type of conversation with the customer. So a lot of companies out there right now are and have heavily invested in, whether it's cloud economists or however you want to phrase these people, that do a deep dive analysis in business value. So I think that sales, ahead of that deep dive, need to have a high level conversation to see if it's interesting for the customer. And it's like all these things. Is it interesting for you, Mr. Customer? A lot of our customers are finding value in that. I know it's different there. What does it mean to you? And if you have that simplistic conversation, it's amazing what you can get back. So it starts in the right place. You're leading with the relevance to the customer in the first conversation. You sort of say, you can even sort of play dumb in these scenarios where, I think this is how it works, but you want to give the customer the pen, so to speak, give them the ownership of the numbers and what it means. And then very quickly, you get into a position of understanding, yes or no, is it valuable for the customer? So I know, Matt, that one of the deals that's springing to mind for a bank that you did a while ago, in that particular deal, you got to a stage where you actually got visibility of their business case quite quickly. So that was superb.
Yeah, and I think the sooner you can get into that position, then it makes the whole conversation much easier. And I think in that scenario, we did a multi-million-dollar deal off the first price we put on the table solely because we landed the value with the customer well ahead of putting the price on the table. So I think it was around, that was all around driving agility. So I think the quicker you can get to value, and that should really be the motivator of, most of the people we go through. If we get feedback from people who've been through some of our programs, is often that actually the benefit they do see is they spend less time negotiating and more time basically agreeing a business case. And once you've agreed that business case, the prices that go into it are actually almost insignificant in some ways. So there's definitely some value in landing the cost, risk, and time benefits well ahead of trying to get into a pricing conversation.
Yeah, I would say that to add to that point as well, in the clients that we work with, the benefit almost of an outside accelerant is that you don't tend to fall back into the depth of what you know and where you've been as a culture. So there's always a tendency to see through the lens of your pedigree and history as an organization, rather than how can we do this simply, and how can we quickly align with what the customer wants to talk about, rather than our heritage, our baggage, call it what you will. How can we quickly make that transition? So that's leads us into the embedding. I wanted to talk a little bit, Matt, about the embedding into the day job and making, identifying the best practice and pulling that out as well. Manager-led side of the house, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's one of the things we've seen from the programs is that no one in the organization can do it on their own. So sales enablement can't drive this transformation. You absolutely need the support of the manager teams. And I think, one of the things I recognized at HP very early on is that the managers were not interested and took a long time to get on board with the transformation.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that we actively try and do now is the learning we took from that was actually you need one of the best places to start on any transformation towards value is getting the managers on board, making sure they're carving out the time to actually speak to their teams, coach them, go through the process. And I think we've got some really great examples where we worked with clients where you can slowly see the penny dropping, where actually that is the right way to do it. You've got to get the managers on board. You've got to get them actively involved in the customer's challenges, the objectives, and the value. So once you start to do that, the whole thing changes, and they stop forecasting and they start creating the news. They start creating wins in the organization that they wouldn't have had before, and you start to build that momentum off the back of those as well. And I think that sort of leads quite nicely on to sort of like some of the examples where we've actually actively done this. And there's lots of case studies we could talk you through in terms of why. But I think obviously we've spoken quite a lot about our time at HPE, but we obviously worked with quite a lot of large enterprise clients and some smaller ones as well. But I think the principle has been very much the same. So if we think through some of our experiences working with Lenovo, they were very much building out a sales organization with 750 salespeople. I mean, Lenovo are very much a product-centric organization, so they were selling a lot of tin, a lot of features. Anyone watching the World Cup will see that they're massively sponsoring the World Cup. They're very heavily into AI right now, and and it's all part of their service-led transformation, sponsored by Ken Wong. When we first started talking to Ken and to Dale, it was very much about, we've picked 750 salespeople, we've moved them into the services organization, we've had 2 years at this, and it's not really working. So the first thing we did was go back to the ground, really run the drive process with them to understand where their sellers were at and the challenges that they were facing into. And there were a number of things that really stood out, but the main one was that the salespeople were literally throwing up loads of stats against the wall and hoping something was going to grip. They didn't really know how to get into the value or what the solution was actually doing for their customers. So that was the priority number one to fix. We then get into so fixing that, we built them the business value calculator. We enabled them on how to have the conversation around cost, risk, and time, and got them to be almost opening up their conversations with customers around cost, risk, and time challenges that people were seeing in the market, and having a point of view, which is something they weren't used to having. And again, by actively driving them through a program where they were going customer centric, and they were trying to be as customer centric as they could be, and talking about the customer and running that program, they started to get some deals over the line. They started to win. They started to build that momentum, and they started to build the culture around it that allowed them to make those wins repeatable across the organization, giving other salespeople the insights, giving them the stories, and building that culture off the back of it. And that drove into 14 quarters of double-digit growth, and is now a massive catalyst in their service-led transformation. So I think it's a really great way of actually taking people on a journey who were very product centric and getting them to be not 100% value, but driving them towards much more of a value-based conversation.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, what stood out for me, there's probably three things that have stood out for me here, Matt, where you need to sort of ground teams in the reality of where they are. So it's not necessarily who's shouting loudest or what they're saying, it's the actual gritty reality of the situation, to allow you to plan how you need to underpin to get people into value, into those outcome-based customer-centric conversations super quickly. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, as you're saying, embedding and helping sellers to get to that point of qualification quickly. The where does it grip moments? How do we get those in quickly into the seller language, the communication, the finding of that value quickly, and be able to qualify in or out in super quick time? And then there's the dedicated program around the spoon feeding, the coaching, whatever is needed, discovery, whatever is needed along that process. And you touched on this earlier as well, Matt, the cultural elements. So when we say culture, we really mean not just it's what is expected of people. So how do you set that up at a manager and SLT level in the organization? Because you want people to be able to be engaged with this, not sort of listen and wait for somebody else to go first. You want them to actually have a culture where it's expected of them, they're accountable and responsible. And how do you set that up, and how do you get that management and SLT piece that's needed to evolve into those new set of activities or new set of offers or whatever the business driver is? So in terms of what we can give you to help you to get into driving your sellers and managers into that position of value and outcome quicker, we can obviously provide you with a copy of the Drive framework. And there is also, Matt, a little bit of an assessment as to where your teams are today. So we can offer you a 3-minute sort of process that's a quick snapshot there. I don't know if you wanted to put a bit of color on that, Matt, in terms of that particular offer that we can talk to the audience about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think the short drive assessment is really designed to help you think about where your salespeople are, where you see some of the challenges, where you see some of the opportunities. So it is a really quick and dirty, but actually the people that have been through that program it helps open their mind to what some of the challenges they're facing into. And so I definitely think it's worth spending your 3 minutes at the end of this session. So Stephen's going to put the link to that in the chat. And then there is we can share with you as well the Drive framework, which is basically an insight into some of the areas we go into when we're trying to build that drive position. So we know we can really start to understand a bit more granular level where the salespeople are. And as I said, whilst promoting a framework assessment, I would also actively encourage you to speak to salespeople when you're doing the Drive frameworks, because actually it is really critical that you can start to really unpack the questions that they're trying to give, the answers they're giving you, and then trying to validate where they really are in the organization and their capability. I think it's a lot more extensive than a short questionnaire anyway.
Exactly. So we had some questions come in ahead of the event as well. Hopefully we talked a little bit about David's. We had one which is, how quickly should we see results and what should we measure first? So in terms of that, I think that with the right approach, you can get to where you are versus where you'd like to be at a granular level quite quickly. So in our experience, we could sort of help our customers to do that within a couple of weeks period, where we can give them where their weak points are, what investments they might want to think about, and more importantly, why. So how do they make that? How do they get to that journey from current state to desired future state? We can do that fairly quickly. We can help you on that journey. And in terms of what you measure first, it's around behaviors, and I would always go seller-centric. And what I mean by that is, how can you help them get a better return on time? So it's all about getting that to that point where they're either passionate about doubling down on something, or they can say, no, it's not for me. I need to spend my time doing something. So that getting them to that point quickly always gets a positive outcome from a seller. So those are the types of things. We've got a whole list of things that you might want to measure and take a look at there. I would say, please obviously link in with us and ask us questions, whatever you want. We can try and help you on that. How is this different from sales methodology training we've already bought? So regardless of your sales methodology, I would say that it's about the doing of the doing. Getting into that doing phase is absolute. So that's where I think that, there's so many great sales methodologies out there. We could probably reel off half a dozen now, and so could you. So it's not about that sales methodology. It's about getting into the doing of the doing, setting that expectation as a culture, and driving that through the organization from a position of really understanding where you are to where you want to get to. I don't know if you've got any comment on those questions. I know I've been rattling those off, Matt, but are there any comments that you would make on those questions? No, sales methodology and speed of results.
Yeah, sales methodology, I think you're right. I mean, for me, speed of results, I think, within 90 days, you should start to see some improvement in people leading with value. I think that's one of the things that I think the process is designed to get into action really quickly and start to build pipeline, and start to, depending on the length of your sales cycle, you should start to see some really good opportunities coming through. I think in terms of the sales methodology, I agree. I think for me, is all about doing the doing. It's making sure that we get people into that place. I'm just reading your comment, David, as well. So in the doing, how do we reinforce that message without it sounding like beating sales over the head? So I think there's a number of ways we can help sales reinforce the message. So one of the things we do, a lot of customers will use AI to support salespeople and support in the moment. with sort of consistently the messaging. I think one of the things I've seen and we saw at Lenovo was we've built a culture around value selling and around actually people coming together, collaborating on their cover plans for the customer, and then going and executing those cover plans and coming back. So it felt, so I think what they saw was very quickly they were reticent to start the process initially, but they actually seen very quick saw value in it and realized actually they were shortcutting the sales cycle. So I definitely think there's a few things that worked in Grips in that space as well.
Yeah, I think what's key is always to think about it in their terms. They're in a high pressure environment. They need help, the right type of help. They need support. You can go at it from their lens as much as possible. So rather than sort of tell them to do stuff, you can set them, for example, a challenge around how quickly can they get to the point of quality, how quickly can they help themselves, and those sorts of things. We had some interesting answers come back from this question to the sellers. If you asked it, or if you ask it, what comes back, and things like that. So it's all about, what's in it for them, what's in it for the customer. So I think you can also use management and SLT to set the expectation for that, David, as well. So around the things that you measure kind of thing. So rather than a performance numbers based sales meeting, you can start to have, this is a question that really worked well and it uncovered a lot of value. I want everybody to come away, ask this question, let's go. So it's around getting that buy-in of the types of things that you should do for value for your customer and for yourself as a seller. So if you can get into that way of working and expectation, then it doesn't feel like they're being beaten over the head all the time, because the value is for them and their customers. So I think, in my experience, that is the key. That is the key. Okay, we've been talking an awful lot. We've been rattling through this stuff. We're really passionate about it. Please link in with us. We will contact you with the frameworks, etc. after this webinar. It just remains for me to thank you for joining. Superb questions, and we look forward to speaking with you very soon. Thank you all.